Have you ever heard of a man who married his own granddaughter and lived openly with her as his wife, while an entire Appalachian town watched and chose to stay silent? Because this isn't a legend, it's a documented story, and what happened next is far more disturbing than the marriage itself. In the narrow Appalachian hollow where the mountains folded inward like closing hands, there was a town that did not appear on most maps. A single road curved through it, cutting past weathered porches, collapsed barns, and long stretches of land owned by the same families for more than a century. The people who lived there measured time differently, not by years or decades, but by names, last names that carried weight, history, and power. Outsiders passed through without stopping. Those who stayed learned quickly that some things were not discussed, not because they were unknown, but because they were understood too well. At the edge of the hollow stood an old house built from dark timber and repaired so many times that no original wall remained untouched. The man who owned it had inherited the land, the house, and the authority that came with both. He was well into his 70s, his back slightly bent, his hands thick and scarred from work done decades earlier. People spoke his name carefully. He was not loud, not violent, not outwardly cruel. He paid his taxes, he attended church. He loaned money when banks refused. In a town like this, that was enough to make a man untouchable. The girl who lived with him was young, too young for the role she had been given. She was quiet, pale and small-framed, with eyes that rarely met anyone else's for more than a moment. When she walked beside him, she kept half a step behind, as if trained to follow rather than lead. At first, strangers assumed she was his granddaughter, or perhaps a niece taken in after some family tragedy. That assumption was never corrected immediately. No one rushed to explain. The truth was revealed only when asked directly, and even then, it was delivered without emotion, as though it were a matter of record rather than something monstrous. She was his wife. There was no announcement when the marriage happened, no celebration, no whispered scandal at the local store. One day, she was simply no longer referred to as a child. She moved from the back bedroom to the front. Her last name remained the same, as it had always been. In a place where families reused names for generations, few found that strange. When the marriage license was filed at the county office, it looked ordinary enough. 2 signatures, 2 witnesses. Ages written carefully, legally, without explanation. Nothing in the paperwork hinted at blood. What made it more unsettling was not that the town knew, it was that the town behaved as if there were nothing to know. Men nodded when they passed the couple. Women asked polite questions about meals and weather. The church continued to seat them together in the same pew each Sunday. No one laughed, no one stared, no one intervened. Silence was not enforced. It was chosen. The girl did not speak in public unless spoken to first. When questions came her way, the man answered them for her, his voice calm, steady, practiced. He never raised it. He never rushed. The control he exercised was quiet, almost gentle, which made it harder to name as control at all. She smiled when expected. She lowered her head when appropriate. To an outsider, she might have looked shy or devoted, or simply raised old-fashioned. To the town, she looked exactly as she was supposed to. People told themselves stories to make it easier. They said she was mature for her age. They said the family had always done things differently. They said the mountains bred hard lives and harder choices. Most of all, they said it was not their place to judge. In Appalachia, privacy was sacred, even when it protected something rotten. What almost no one said out loud, but everyone understood, was that the girl had once called him grandfather, that she had grown up on the same land he now claimed to protect through her, that the marriage had less to do with love and everything to do with keeping property intact, bloodlines closed and names preserved. The Hollow had seen variations of this before, though never spoken of so plainly. This was not an accident. It was a system, By the time the truth reached ears beyond the valley, it had already been living there for years, breathing quietly among the hills. And the most disturbing part was not the man who took his granddaughter as a wife. It was the town that watched it happen, adjusted its language, signed its names as witnesses, and went on with its life as if nothing had changed at all. Long before the girl became a wife, the valley had already decided what was acceptable. This was not a place shaped by sudden crimes or moments of madness. It was shaped by repetition, by families folding inward over generations, by land that passed from father to son without interruption, and by an unspoken belief that survival mattered more than morality. Outsiders called it isolation. The people who lived there called it continuity. The Hollow had only a few dominant families, their names carved into deeds, gravestones, and church records going back more than 100 years. Marriages between cousins were once common and quietly overlooked. Births happened at home, attended by women who knew which questions not to ask. Schools were small, attendance irregular, and children often disappeared from the rolls without explanation. When someone asked, the answer was always the same: family business. The old man's family had more land than most. Acres that could not be sold without losing power, land that produced timber, grazing rights, and quiet cash that never passed through banks. The greatest fear was not scandal, it was division. If land was split, control weakened. If heirs married outsiders, ownership fractured. The solution, passed down in fragments and half-sentences, was to keep everything inside. Blood stayed with blood. Names stayed with names. The girl had been raised with this logic long before she could question it. After her mother died, she remained on the property, moving from caretaker to dependent, from child to asset. Education came second to obedience. She learned how to cook, how to clean, how to keep her voice low. She learned that her future had already been decided, though no one used those words. It was framed as protection, as duty, as the only way to ensure the family survived in a world that, according to the elders, was always looking to take what little they had left. By the time the marriage was arranged, there was no drama because there was no debate. The witnesses were relatives who understood the stakes. The preacher who signed the paper told himself that legality was not his responsibility to challenge. The county clerk saw nothing that required intervention. Everyone involved had a reason to stay quiet, and silence, when shared by enough people, begins to feel like truth. The town did not celebrate the marriage, but it did not reject it either. Life continued with the same routines. The girl appeared less in public after the ceremony. When she did, she was presented as a wife, not a child, her past quietly erased by new language. Those who felt discomfort buried it under familiarity. Those who felt anger learned to swallow it. Speaking up meant being labeled an outsider, even if you had been born there. What allowed it all to work was not cruelty, but normalization. Children grew up watching adults accept things without comment. Questions were discouraged not through punishment, but through absence. No one explained why certain family trees looked wrong. No one clarified why ages did not align. The truth was visible to anyone who looked closely, but the culture taught people not to look too closely at all. By the time the girl fully understood the role she had been given, it was already irreversible. She had no reference point for another life, no support outside the valley, no language to describe what had been done to her. The town had shaped her understanding of love, duty, and obedience so completely that resistance felt unnatural, almost immoral. And so the unthinkable remained normal, not because it was accepted, but because it was never challenged. For years, the truth existed only as a shared understanding inside the hollow, known, avoided, and carefully protected by the people who benefited from its silence. But systems built on secrecy have a weakness. They leave paper behind, and paper, unlike people, does not forget. The first signs were not accusations or confessions, but inconsistencies. Property records showed parcels of land transferred without clear lineage, passing through names that appeared too frequently, looping back on themselves. Marriage licenses listed ages that aligned legally, but clashed biologically. Birth certificates appeared years late, sometimes decades, filed only when benefits or schooling required them. On paper, everything was lawful. Together, the documents formed a pattern that could no longer be explained away as coincidence. The family's land told the story more clearly than any witness ever could. Deeds revealed how ownership remained concentrated in a single name across generations, protected from division through carefully structured marriages. When one potential heir threatened to leave, the paperwork adjusted. Relationships were redefined. Children were relabeled. A daughter became a niece. A granddaughter became a wife. The system was not chaotic, it was precise. Public records also showed how oversight failed without ever being formally violated. No complaints were filed, no investigations were triggered. The law depended on someone speaking first, and in the hollow, no one ever did. Officials from outside the region rarely questioned what appeared to be long-standing local arrangements. Everything was signed. Everything was stamped. Nothing was challenged. What made the situation especially disturbing was how the children born into this structure were documented. Their birth certificates listed parents who, on closer inspection, could not logically exist in the roles assigned. Ages overlapped. Family trees folded inward until they resembled knots rather than branches. Yet each document, viewed in isolation, appeared unremarkable. It was only when placed side by side that the truth emerged, an entire lineage engineered to protect land, not people. When asked later how such records could exist without consequence, the answer was always the same. The system was never designed to detect this kind of harm. It was designed to process forms. And in the hollow, forms were filled out carefully, deliberately, by people who understood exactly how much could be hidden in plain sight. The town's defense, when the records began to draw outside attention, was not denial. It was justification. They spoke of poverty, of tradition, of a way of life outsiders could not understand. They argued that intervention would destroy families, not save them. They insisted that legality mattered more than morality and that survival had always required hard choices. What the documents ultimately revealed was not just one forbidden marriage, but a structure that made it possible, one that relied on silence, legality, and shared benefit. And once those records were seen together, the question was no longer whether the town knew. It was how long it had been willing to pretend that knowing was not the same as participating. The hollow did not change all at once. Silence, after years of practice, does not break loudly. It fractures in small, uneven ways, through pauses in conversation, through questions asked too late, through eyes that no longer look away as quickly as they once did. The first crack did not come from law enforcement or journalists. It came from someone with no history in the valley and no stake in its land. She was a temporary presence, a nurse assigned to the rural clinic for only a few months. She noticed what others had learned not to notice: the girl's age, the way she deferred before answering even the simplest questions, the way the man spoke for her without ever touching her. There were no visible injuries, no dramatic signs of abuse. What stood out was control so complete it no longer needed force. The nurse asked questions quietly, not accusations, just clarifications. Each answer led to another inconsistency. Each inconsistency traced back to the same name, the same property, the same household at the edge of the hollow. When the nurse filed her report, it was measured and cautious, written in the neutral language of procedure. But it was enough to invite attention the town had spent generations avoiding. By the time officials arrived, the damage was already done, not to the system, but to the people trapped inside it. The investigation moved slowly, hindered by missing records, cooperative witnesses, and laws that had never anticipated a case like this. The marriage had been legal on paper. The girl was now an adult. The children born into the arrangement had no clear classification as victims under existing statutes. Everything that mattered had happened years earlier, out of reach. The town reacted not with outrage, but with fear. Fear of losing land, fear of being judged, fear that the silence they had relied on would now be used against them. Some residents defended the man openly, insisting outsiders were destroying a way of life they did not understand. Others retreated completely, refusing interviews, closing doors, pretending the Hollow had nothing left to say. The girl spoke only once, and even then, not publicly. Her statement was brief, factual, and stripped of emotion, as if describing someone else's life. There were no dramatic revelations, no moment of clarity that brought justice or closure. What she described was routine, normal. That, more than anything, revealed the depth of what had been done. When the case faded from attention, as cases like this often do, the Hollow returned to its routines. The man aged. The land remained in his name. The system adjusted as it always had. But something irreversible had occurred. The silence that once felt natural now felt heavy. Not everyone noticed it, but those who did could not forget it. The story did not end with punishment or redemption. It ended with recognition, quiet, uncomfortable, and incomplete. A recognition that tradition can be shaped into a shield for cruelty, that legality can exist without justice, and that entire communities can participate in harm, not by acting, but by choosing again and again to remain silent.